Thank you very much for showing up. And this is, dream come true kind of space for me. I remember my first year at Hampshire, young, influenceable 17-year-old that I was, and I came in here and there was a speech by a guy representing the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, making the case for Bobby Sands, some of the prisoners who had bombed and killed people in the name of, saving Northern Ireland from the British. And I went home with a poster and I put it on my wall, and I was all about that cause for a moment anyway. I thought it was a cool poster. But you end up with I've had a lot of really important lectures and moments in my life, and I hope I can be that to some of you here, but I don't really aspire to match talents with Iqbal Ahmed and some of the other people I saw speak here. So Charlene asked me for a title, and I was in a bad mood, and I made this title up. But we are in you're living in a very interesting time, and you're all aware of it, but things are falling apart pretty quickly. And the worrying part is that for people who have been paying attention for a longer period of time, things are happening faster than the scientists anticipated in many cases. Many of the predictions that people thought would come true in 2030 are already here, and the Arctic ice is one where it was, varying estimates of how long the Arctic would survive global warming. This is a picture you can barely see. Maybe we could kill some of those lights and we could see these amazing images that I'm going to show you. If you can see here, there's a kayak in a river of meltwater on the surface of Greenland. And last summer, through satellite measurements, it was found that 90% of Greenland was melting, and the surface. And the water is flowing down into the middle of, down through the ice. Sometimes it's a mile of ice, down to the rock and then out to sea. And much of that is irreversible because it doesn't grow back very easily. If Greenland melts, there will be no more Cape Cod and other coastal islands. It's not a joke to be messing around, and we're doing a big experiment on the planet. So tonight, here's a little, just because I want to bore you with PowerPoint with words on it first, is what I'm going to talk about. I want to show you my despair and show you some of the truth that is freaking us out a little bit at this point, and then bring you to some moments, some bits of hope, and talk about some of the fights that we see coming up. I'm going to get through, how I got to where I am and what Hampshire has to do with that, and that's significant. And then some of what I do, what I'm known for is this sort of accountability work and holding corporations like Exxon and the Koch brothers to account. And that's where I see, the Sun Tzu meets Iqbal comment is just to say, I have the humanitarian that Iqbal, I don't know if many of you know who he was, but he was this amazing scholar that worked here when I was here and taught here, and he opened my mind in considerable ways to how, American imperialism and Middle East policy was going to lead to things like 9/11. I mean, he absolutely predicted that really bad things were going to happen, and this was in early 1980s. And he was a warrior as well. He was, he was a fighter, and he knew what needed to be done. And so you'll get some of this throughout, but we had an interesting discussion in a class earlier that made me modify somewhat what I'm going to talk about how we work and how we think. And then, there's something about the best laid plans. Even if you think you have a good idea, it doesn't always happen. So this is my origin. That's me crabbing or fishing or something on the Chesapeake Bay. There's the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And I did my Div 3 on the Chesapeake Bay with Charlene and Bob Rakoff on the politics and how these borderlines don't really help governments make decisions and people make decisions about environmental sanctity. And so Pennsylvania had nothing to gain to help the Bay. In my Div 3, I looked at what was blocking and what was enabling interstate cooperation. And that same thing is true with global warming. It's the atmosphere. It's not a river or a bay, but it's the same need for cooperation. So And I pulled this up because when I was at Hampshire, I had this book on my shelf written by your president, and it was this. At the end of the first term of Reagan administration, they had just pillaged the EPA and Interior, put in all these skunks into really important positions, and erased all the regulations that they could, and even erased entire departments of surface mining or something. Watt eliminated, right? They just took out entire departments of the government, a lot like what the Koch brothers would like to do. And that was a really good book, by the way, for my young mind to understand the scope of the attack. The same people, by the way, the same institutions that those individuals that became the cabinet members of the Reagan administration, those same institutions were funded and founded in many cases by the Koch brothers before anybody knew who they were, through an entire right-wing infrastructure of think tanks and thought manipulators targeting the judicial branch, the legislative branch, the media. Look up something called the Powell Memo. I think I've spoken about that here before, but it's pretty crucial. So quickly, the Hampshire connections are not insignificant with what I do now. Within what I do now, Katie Flynn Jambeck, who is used to work here and went here about 10 years after me, partly runs our actions team right now. Les Stone, who was also in my generation, is an amazing photographer who just did a tour of Pennsylvania fracking territory for us and got some incredible images. Steve Hart, also one of my contemporaries here, is a photographer who lives in New York who took some amazing pictures. His building was almost destroyed by Sandy, and he took some good shots for us. And this little stanza at the bottom here, I always go back to this, where I was in a class, probably in this room, with John Reed and Ray Coppinger, ecogeology, and two of the guys who were in that class with me, Eric Stagg and Eric Loring, both end up working on climate from different perspectives. And I always thought it would make a good magazine article or maybe a forum here, because Eric has become one of the premier ice scientists in the world. He works at the University of Washington doing ice cores in Antarctica and the West Antarctic ice sheet, and that's a pretty important thing to understand. And then Eric Loring is the senior environmental person for the entire Inuit and Inupiat tribal system, doing environmental science and policy for the people of the North who are, fairly vulnerable as well. So I'm sitting there, banging heads. So let's go to despair. It's a dark place. It's the truth. It's not easy to avoid these days, but it's coming at you. So 2012, it was just determined through the data records, was the hottest year on record in the contiguous U.S. That's not an easy record to beat, and we beat it by a lot. And the bottom one's harder to see, but that's sort of the variance from the average over a lot of the country. What that meant was, this is the current one, what that meant this summer was 60-something% of the country was in what they term exceptional drought, which is beyond extreme, beyond severe. It's exceptional. It means it's a serious outlier in the long-term record. What that means is we're not going to recover from that, even with a wet winter, even with the blizzards we've been having right now. We're not coming out of that, which means another very tenuous year for the Corn Belt, which has fairly important global ramifications. That's just another throw-in of a moment 2 Julys ago when suddenly the heat index in D.C. hit 108. What's predicted in the latest national assessment on climate change, what's predicted for the southeast especially, is extreme heat indexes, to the point where a study came out a couple weeks ago saying it will become severely unhealthy to work outdoors in much of the South. So that has pretty important ramifications on how we farm and whose lives are going to be compromised to pick our crops and work outside. Hurricane Sandy, so beautiful and so big and intense. I didn't find it. I wanted to show a clip of Jim Cantori was just freaking out at one point. The weatherman, weathercaster guy on the Weather Channel, he's like a weather nut. And he was, at one point, the bands on the west side of the storm the energy was out to Chicago. I mean, it was that big. And he said, look at this, it's 2,000 miles across. The system, from space was that big. And okay, that's, if you're a weather geek, that's kind of cool. But what happened? Things got really broken and torn apart, and people lost their lives, people lost a lot of stuff. And it's not, this, for this amusement park I went to as a kid in Seaside Heights, the roller coaster's in the ocean now. So we can rebuild some of this stuff. We're a wealthy country. We're not, we're not without means, but a lot of people lost a lot. There's a lot of the poorer people, the people who actually live on the coast, lost everything. The wealthier people who come to the coast for the summer, they can figure it out. But the, total cost figures are now up around 70 billion. Katrina was 120, but I think with lost work and revenue and everything else, this is going to top that. And the government has started to chip in against their will, actually, right? The Republicans didn't want to throw any money at it. So we went up there. Greenpeace showed up, and we tried to make a, just a little statement with some blown apart boardwalk in Rockaways. And then we took our solar truck, the Rolling Sunlight, which this solar panel folds out and generates about enough power for a house. But we were mostly charging people's cell phones so they could call their relatives. We were the only light source, the only beacon of light in East Rockaway, whatever the Rockaway we were in at the time. The only place that had light. So all these people started coming in, and people had severe health problems. There were people who had medication that needed to be refrigerated. They were pretty run over. And then our guys with Occupy Sandy, which was sort of the remnant, very intense part of the Occupy movement that kept together and built a network and started doing things, built a clinic. They cleared out this warehouse and built a clinic and started giving insulin shots and just doing basic medical stuff, to the point where, and this is immediately, this is two or 3 days after Sandy hit, to the point where the Red Cross and FEMA were referring people to our clinic because they hadn't set up yet. They weren't equipped to deal with the scale of this thing. It was so big, and so many people were out of their homes that it was quite ugly, and the government infrastructure didn't hold together, is the bottom line there. So this was a Thanksgiving feast that the group of volunteers and activists put together, and we provided some of the solar power to charge it, and that was pretty inspiring, but very depressing at the same time. But then Bloomberg trumped all of us. Mayor Bloomberg put this on the cover of his magazine, Bloomberg Business Week, and that could have been a Greenpeace bumper sticker or a banner at some point, but he made some very incredible statements, and he endorsed, if you remember, he endorsed President Obama. He had remained neutral in the election, and he endorsed Obama on the grounds that he thought Obama would do more on climate, and he declared this a climate disaster and said, we can't take it, and if we start to experience 100-year events every year, something's out of whack. So one of many amazing voices to emerge. So I just pulled these up because this is this week. It's coming so quickly. There was an assessment of 2012, and turns out a huge jump again in CO2 in the atmosphere, probably mostly due to China. Things aren't slowing down, even with a broken economy worldwide. And then this optimistic article in the USA Today that ships could sail right over the North Pole by 2050. So the shipping companies are thrilled by that idea. Polar bears, not so much. And then a very interesting study came out, or beginning of a study came out today, looking at how the lack of sea ice in the Arctic has influenced Arctic weather. So the systems, the oscillations in the Arctic are different than they were predictably, and that some of those oscillations and spin-off systems that come out of the Arctic may have contributed to Sandy. That what happened there was this bizarre torquing of the jet stream where it was doing this giant button hook around Florida and actually going back west for a second. It was like a huge eddy, and that's what drew the storm inland, where it should have been pushed off into the ocean. So that is interesting. When you start to think about the weather in the Arctic and how it influences our weather here, we always hear about Arctic or Yankee clippers or Arctic something or others coming down off of the Yukon, but this is all the way farther north. You've got weather, and it's all connected, right? So without getting too holistic, this is a picture of, again, I can't really see it from here. I hope you can. This is the end of the world. This is Greenland melting. It's incredibly beautiful and frightening. These melt pools form on the surface, and they then become they accelerate on their own, because then you have absorption of the water. There's even a lot of discussion about how a lens of water on top of the ice creates like it conveys the sun straight through into the ocean water. It makes the ice transparent, and then you end up with algae blooms underneath the ice that are different and new, and everything's going to change. And this is all largely irreversible stuff, like even if we cut emissions tomorrow. So we're watching in real time bad things happen. Here again are the kayakers and these melt pools where some of them the water is going straight down. And then we get into it a little bit. We've taken scientists up there on our ships just to provide a little bit of a platform to measure as things collapse. And one of our roles is to protect creatures like this, but to forward the discussion about the science, because the science is the engine that drives the train. If we don't have concrete science, we don't know where the stop sign is, and we don't know how urgent it is, and we don't actually change our behavior until it's too late. And it is not too late. But then there's companies like Shell or others who have a different intention. This is one of their posters in a subway station. Let's go. Go. And I'm very cynical, because they've just had a series of unfortunate events with $4 billion invested in drilling off of Alaska. Their ships are all broken. They're all now on what's essentially a tow truck of the sea. These lift ships have come to rescue the drilling fleet that they said was the best in the world and they had invested in, to take them to Korea to dry docks to repair them from one season in the Arctic, where they all broke and ran aground and caught fire and all manner of things. So if that's the best they can do, it's a little bit disturbing. We spoofed this and had an online contest where people could make their own ads. I didn't pull them up, but it's quite funny. You check it out. It's people came up with some good alternatives to the Let's Go campaign. And then we did this creative. I love this piece. It was with an aerial artist. Just to, I don't actually know what it means, but it's a bit of, just saying, humans are on the planet, and there is maybe genius somewhere to be seen, and embracing the fact that this is a global, the Arctic is a global problem and a global resource. Greenpeace does really big things sometimes that are, you hope make a difference. The Deepwater Horizon, we're now in the very boring holding them accountable in court part of this that nobody will see. This is the far more frightening part, when the oil was burning on the surface of the water, and terrible things were happening to critters, some of which we don't know where they are to this day. And we did a lot of work down there that I talked about a couple years ago here, just trying to bring journalists into this. The image in the lower right was some of the first oil to come ashore, and we tried to take a crew from BBC over there, and the hired thugs that BP had, the hired security, who were basically local fishermen, kept us out of the area with a reporter aboard our runabout. They were actually limiting access to this, and the government in collusion. They really did not want the story to be told. They didn't want images like that to see your eyes, because it would change it would make people upset to see pelicans coated with grease. So then we did, a few months later, we took our vessel out there and made an all call to the scientific community to bring their gear aboard and sample different things. The yellow things are acoustic buoys, where they monitor where the whale population is, and we got a crew to rent us these submarines and did some work on deep sea corals. And the lower left, I was on board at that point when we had a team from Texas A&M testing deep water chemistry and benthic ecology, and pretty radical experience in my life. I sort of felt like I was Rachel Carson and Jacques Cousteau and somebody else wrapped up. It was amazing, the talent. Then we submitted 50 Freedom of Information Act requests approximately in August of that year, and some of the stuff we're still getting back. Going on 2.5 years later, we're still getting responses from the transparent Obama administration. This was a document that we have still not gotten a straight answer on, that was slipped in with another response. And these little symbols, you can read here, maybe some of you, all the creatures that were being seen during the spill time, endangered species and protected species, including whales I've never heard of. I had to look them up, and different kinds of dolphins, different kinds of turtles. And we don't know what happened to these animals, whether they were just fine, they were just hanging out, or they were in peril. But these are just some of the spottings that were. And then we got this photograph of a family of 4 sperm whales in the oil, in the streaks of oil. And again, that can't be good for you if you're a whale, but there's no accounting for these creatures. And under the Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act, there are severe penalties for even bothering a whale, let alone injuring it or mortally wounding it. We got another picture of a whale that was just dead and no cause of death, but the government denies that you could prove that it was oil. And the last moment of despair here is something you're going to hear more and more about in coming years: ocean acidification. This is the other part of polluting the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. Is the carbon dioxide is absorbed into the seawater, changing its chemistry, making it impossible for little creatures with shells to form their own shells. Pretty bad consequences, especially if you're a pteropod. That little thing in the top right is a little flying snail. It sort of floats around like a nautilus, tiny little things. They are the main food for baby salmon and medium-sized salmon and other fish. They swim in huge swarms. So we took this team on board to do these things called mesocosms, which are isolated little you put this cylinder down into the water, so you have natural seawater, and then pump a lot of carbon dioxide into it to simulate the future, and then see what happens to the animals inside. And it's not good. The results are that things don't do so well in a lot more carbon dioxide, and in fact, in the level of carbon dioxide that is going to happen at this point. We're up on 400 parts per million, going farther north, and this is probably a worse problem in the near term than climate in some ways, because the food chain of the ocean is fairly crucial to all of our well-being. So, all right, so with that, we go on to hope, because I don't want you guys to get depressed or anything. I mean, no big deal. Planet's falling apart, and I didn't even touch on fisheries collapse or things like the bluefin tuna or rainforests or some of the other things that make you not happy. So here, just again, some of the latest news is that renewables, in spite of the broken economy, in spite of everything against it, renewable energy is doing really well. In January 2013, all the new energy infrastructure power plants essentially built in the United States were renewable. No new fossil generation was put online in January. That may change through the year, but that's quite interesting, just in 1 month to have no fossils being built. Even gas, which is, the fracking gas is coming on so rapidly. And then wind power expanded by 20% last year. That's a huge jump, unpredictable. Even the best case scenarios that Greenpeace put out in our, rosy way of looking at things were way lower than the growth that wind has experienced in the last decade. It's going quite well. And solar is, going ahead of schedule as well. The market is, the demand is not even, the market's not even keeping up with demand in many cases. So, and that's partly because of cheap solar panels from China with other consequences. And then here's another just hopeful sub-story is we're doing work in the Bering Sea to protect these canyons, these giant canyons. Some of them are bigger than the Grand Canyon, but undersea. and they've never been explored. So we took submarines down there and discovered that it's not just bare ground. There's a lot of soft corals, and that thing in the middle is a new species of sponge that we discovered with a NOAA scientist, and actually got a new name for the sponge. I can't remember the name right now, but it's a local word for guardian of the Aleutians. So this project is really about protecting the pollock, which are the majority. It's the largest fishery on Earth. It's an ugly sponge, isn't it? I mean, it's not very charismatic. It's not like a polar bear or something. I see you laughing at it. It's okay. It's not even offended by you laughing at it, because it's just a sponge. The cool thing is, if we protect this, if we found out that there were protectable species there, that under law these species have protection, then they wouldn't be able to bottom trawl in those areas. So our goal is to take these certain places off limits that also end up being rookeries, or breeding grounds for the fish. And right now there's just no regulation. They can fish wherever they want. They just take all the fish they can catch, and these giant factory trawlers, and then it's sent off to China, put in bags, and sent back to your supermarket. Check it out. Next time you go to the supermarket, if you happen to go in the fish aisle, you will see Alaskan pollock from China. What happens? It's just cheaper to send it there if you're a big company, to send it to be processed in China. But if we're on the way to getting new restrictions on the pollock fishing. This is a story, I didn't have good images here, but this is a story that involves Jonathan, so I thought I'd tell it. It's kind of a cool thing that you would never expect Greenpeace to do. And we have, for years, been working on the refrigerant gases, F gases we call them, the CFCs you know about, destroy the ozone hole. Well, they replaced them with, the chemical industry said, don't worry, we'll figure out another way to do it. We'll call it HFC. We'll take the chlorine out, and they're HFCs now and HCFCs. They won't destroy the ozone layer, but we said at the time, but they're greenhouse gases. They're built to trap heat. These gases are designed to be durable and trap heat. That can't be good. And DuPont said, don't worry about that. We're just solving the ozone hole. So now all of your air conditioners, your car, your refrigerator, all have these other gases in them, and it all goes up eventually when those things are shredded someday or leak. How many people have had their air conditioner recharged in their car at some point or another? That's because it leaked. And a car leaks on average twice in its lifetime, and it's a big deal to the atmosphere. And it's a short-term problem because they are super greenhouse gases in the near term, thousands of times, pound for pound, what carbon dioxide does to the atmosphere. So Greenpeace's solution to this bad technology problem was to build a misspelled Greenpeace refrigerator. In 1992 in Germany, we got a factory to start building a refrigerator that used, instead of HFCs, used isobutane, the same stuff that's in a cigarette lighter, which works even better, more efficiently. And years later, there were millions of these things, or 15 years later, there were millions sold everywhere in the world but the United States. They're illegal here because the EPA has never legalized them, and they're sort of a pinch point. So we developed a scheme to make them legal here, and we needed appliance manufacturers and retailers, and we knew that Jonathan was working with GE, with Jeff Immelt, head of GE, so a colleague of mine kindly asked and got an introduction, and we wrote an email, and pretty soon we were on the phone with the top engineers and lawyers at GE. And this never happened. If anybody asked you, I will deny it. But the GE engineers are saying, yeah, we can do that, sure. And I said to them, yeah, you build stuff like trains. You can build a better refrigerator, right? And they're like, yes, we sure. And the lawyers are going, but it's flammable. It's isobutane. Somebody's gonna get hurt. And they're really afraid of lawyers. They're really afraid of being sued for a refrigerator maybe catching fire because it has this much lighter fluid in it, or lighter fluid gas, butane, when you got the gas range right next to it, and you've got a dozen other things that are flammable under the kitchen sink. So meanwhile, Bosch had sold millions of these things in Europe, never an accident. Like the risk was less than 1%. So once we got GE to, 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 get on side, sort of. We called Walmart and we said, well, you should sell these things because you have this whole sustainability initiative. And next thing we knew, we're in a room at Walmart with GE, with other manufacturers, and Coca-Cola, who we've worked with for years on this problem, is finishing my sentences, is saying, no, it's worse than that guy says. It's a really big problem. Coca-Cola, we've been working with on better appliance manufacturer for many years, and Ben & Jerry's, Unilever, and they were already doing it, and we were kind of getting them to bring that technology to the U.S. So long story short is that the guy from Walmart turns around and says, okay, so which one of you is going to bring us the Greenpeace refrigerator first? And the appliance makers are going, God, and I'm sitting there saying, wow, Walmart just made my campaign demand for me. That's very unusual, and I don't know what to think about that, but because Walmart's a little scary. But indeed, they're doing it. And GE last year launched the very first of these refrigerators in the United States. It's a little too expensive because they're aiming at an upscale market, but we understand that they're going to expand that now to reach new energy appliance energy standards that the Obama administration is putting forward. So it turns out that the greener technology is also better. This is a Ben & Jerry's refrigerator unit that's charged, instead of F-gases, it uses propane. So, and they've launched those nationwide. More hope. This is a very recent victory. A few weeks ago, Asia Pulp and Paper, one of the largest companies you've never heard of, that is a huge paper provider, manufacturer out of China, was a huge player in Indonesia. Deforestation, a giant problem on a planetary scale, especially in places like Indonesia, the Congo, the Amazon. And APP was pretty resistant to changing their ways, and they had the Indonesian government kind of contained. And we ended up putting pressure on many of their customers, including Mattel and different purchasers of their paper. And they suddenly came to the table. They suddenly said, all right, we can agree that this is probably not a long-term plan. And they, in fact, agreed to stop clearing new forest across their entire supply chain, which is quite remarkable. And, won't be in the headlines. It's not going to make CNN, but to forest advocates, that was a company that everybody would have grumbled about. And it really took global pressure from a lot of different angles to bring them to the table. Remains to be monitored. We don't count any of these victories as permanent, especially when it comes to having an incredibly valuable resource out there like a fishery or a forest. There will be someone a decade from now or a generation from now who goes back and tries to take that away. It's gold. Trees or fish, they're worth a fortune. They're becoming more and more valuable. So it's hard to stop, especially illegal harvest and destruction. Moving swiftly on, this report came out, and this seems like a grim type of report. The reason it gives me hope is that this is a study connecting the Arab Spring to climate change, which is not an intuitive connection, but it turns out that the price of wheat shot up because of Russian drought and fire in that year, and therefore the price of bread went up maybe 25%, but in Egypt, they spend, I think, 36% is the figure in here of their income on food. So suddenly you're spending more of your income on less food, and you're hungry. And that's the first thing that got people out in the streets was, what about the bread? And then they got out in the streets and they said, and another thing, and by the way, and then it snowballs, and then we have the Arab Spring. And that is what sociologists have predicted for years would be an eventuality of climate change, this sort of social fabric coming apart, especially because of agricultural collapse and water. So get ready for that. The reason it's hopeful is that it's now becoming public and not just some, professors, sorry, Michael, but some, professors can make noise, but it's even better when it's in a report by some authoritative, I'm just razzing you, but this is, this got some press, it got around, and we need more attention to the, we need the president to see this. We need to, to juxtapose this against the decision on the Keystone Pipeline. to know what's at stake. So quickly, what I'm, some of the work that I'm well known for better or for worse, is attacking these, the climate denial machine, the infrastructure that has kept your dumb uncle in the dark about climate change for many years, and everybody has the dumb uncle that doesn't believe it, and they're starting to believe it. The polling is turning our way in very significant numbers right now, where people, even if they don't get it fully, 80–90% of the public now says something's weird, something's off, and that's a huge jump from years ago. So this is a weird story, and it's self-congratulating, but don't take it that way. We built that report and showed it to a bunch of reporters in 2010, including the New York Times and Newsweek and ABC News, and they all went, "Oh, the Koch brothers, yeah, that's curious." David Koch, the second richest man in New York at the time, behind Bloomberg, now he's the richest. And the New Yorker, Bill McKibben actually introduced me to Jane Mayer at the New Yorker, and she wrote this pretty cool piece on it in August of 2010, which really opened the whole window on the Koch brothers. And now it's common knowledge. The Democratic committee was advertising about the secretive oil billionaires that are attacking Obama, and they've raised a lot of money on Obama versus the Koch brothers. The reason this is important is that they continue to fund infrastructure that's they're actually anti-government activists. They want to take down the government in large part. So I was in this photo essay just before the election in the magazine, and the guy next to me there is Mike Duncan, who is an old friend of Karl Rove's, actually founded Crossroads, the PAC that Karl Rove runs with Rove. He now runs the coal industry's lobby group, ACCCE, the one with the plug in the coal thing that we were talking about today. The clean coal lobby, it's all clean, don't worry. And Duncan is, so the coal industry has become an organ of the Republican Party, is what has happened. And he looks like a nice guy with his, I look kind of like a priest, my friends say. But the guy who photographed it is this super famous photographer, and he says to me, Gaddafi sat in that chair when I sat, when I'm going to the photo. It was really weird. I don't know what I should think about that, but I sat on a stool that, yeah, anyway. But this is, this is to tell you how things happen in strange ways in this work, and you never know how doing a report leads to a string of events that leads to a relationship with a reporter that leads to another thing happening. And I can't emphasize how lucky I feel to be in the place to be able to do that stuff. So this is probably what we should talk about in a discussion now. But what's hopeful in the media right now is that the president's talking about climate in very clear ways, connecting the dots on different things. In the inaugural address, he went on and on and on. The next day, everybody went, "Wow, that was 3 paragraphs on climate. You must be serious about this." And Jay Carney, the spokesperson, said, "Oh, no, don't take it that way. I was just talking about stuff." In the State of the Union, he went on and on and on, and all the reporters said, "So what's the policy? What's the plan?" And there really isn't much of a plan. I mean, they have very limited control about what they can do. And then last weekend, USA Today, I brought this because I smashed it in my bag. But USA Today is not really like a bastion of not considered a journalistic marvel by any means. But this was the cover last weekend. Why you should sweat climate change, and it's a double, full page inside with a whole another article about the demise of the moose with an actual science graph on the cover. So this blows my mind. I mean, people, if you've been watching as intently and trying to get media for so many years, to see that happen means things are changing. It means the editors are going, "We need this on the front. This is news. This is real. This is actually urgent." And there's not one denier in that entire article. No one gets in and says, but, geez, models, computers, can we really tell what's happening in the world? Quickly, the National Climate Assessment is supposed to be done every 4 years, but it's basically a literature review of everything we know about the climate in the United States, and it's coming out in the third or fourth quarter of this year, and it's a big deal. It's supposed to be for policymakers at the local level to make decisions, and you're going to see the enemy try to kill it, and hopefully Obama embrace it and talk about it. And then this is a film that's coming out nationwide this weekend that you'll probably see on DVD shortly, called Greedy Lying Bastards. It's a horrible title, but it'll get your attention. And it's basically all about our work. It's all about the Exxon and Koch denial work, and they went to the Colorado wildfires last year. They went to Nebraska to a farmer. So they go from the impact zones to the political realm to the deniers themselves and back again. It's the best telling of the story so far. So watch for that. Tell your friends, go see the movie. Especially this weekend, if you can tell people to go see it, because if it gets seen this weekend, it'll stick around. Now, this is my other baby, Exxon Secrets. It's a giant relational database of all of these fiends that that pose as scientists and try to tell your uncle that it's not happening. So, moving swiftly again, I think I'd rather have a discussion with you guys, but the fights ahead are significant and not small. We have I just love this. It was wheat pasted before the election, but we are, literally in just broken land. It is, you just can't even begin to how frustrating it is. And now you have all these old senators going, I give up, forget it, I can't, this is not how it should be or not how it was. And I heard Tom Daschle the other day on Diane Rehm or something just going, yeah, it's crazy. You can't even, and Jonathan was in D.C. longer than I have been there. It was better. Even as tough as they fought, they got things done. They actually worked towards something. There was not this flame-throwing, nonsense where it's all showmanship, and they're not running the country, basically. They're just fighting with each other. So what does Obama do in the midst of that? It's complicated. There's a lot of expectation on environmental stuff, on immigration, on everything he has to deal with. Of course, we still have a broken economy, but focusing on the environmental stuff, we have a new administrator in the EPA, a new director of the Department of Energy, a bunch of moving chairs, and he's made some promises to tackle climate change publicly. So now we can hold him and them to the words, but the reality is they can't pass new laws, so they have to use existing authority under the Clean Air Act or other executive orders to change behavior. They're talking really big game about efficiency standards, which is just untapped resources. Negawatts, or demand side reduction in the energy sector, is about the biggest thing you can do that immediately pays back. Meanwhile, they're talking about all of the above. Everything is energy, everything is good. Fracking is good, drilling is good. He's bragging about how there's more drilling now than under George Bush. I mean, can you imagine President Obama in 2008 eventually saying, we're drilling more than George Bush was? Like, what? That's not the guy I voted for or walked the streets for hours to, that's not not on my Greenpeace time, but we all had a lot of hope. So we are a little bit worried, I will say, not a little bit, a lot worried that things might go, just not progress for another 4 years, which we can't afford, which the planet can't afford. And we have big decisions like the Keystone Pipeline, whether or not they let other companies go up to the Arctic. Shell bailed out, but not for long, and whether they license other companies to go drill is a big deal. And then this fight about coal exports, there is a massive lens of coal out in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming and into Montana. It's one of the biggest chunks of coal on Earth. And these companies can't sell it in the U.S., so they now want to put it on rail to the Columbia River to export terminals that they're trying to get permission to build, put it on ships to Japan and China and Korea, where it's very valuable, like 10 times what we're selling it to them or leasing it to them. So if we're leasing it for $1 a ton, they can sell it for 10. And that is not good for America. It's good for a couple companies, but so far the government has seemed to be into that, compliant. So those are some of the things. And then the State Department has opened its own energy department in the State Department, seeing energy decisions as a geopolitical weapon that they can use. So they have America's becoming, you've all heard this too, America's becoming an energy producer, and net we're going to produce more oil than we need pretty soon, more gas than we need, more coal than we need, and we can just sell that to other countries and use it. For example, selling Pennsylvania fracking gas to Poland undermines Russia's power over Poland. So that's a very important thing if you're playing the game of risk and you want to leverage over Putin. That ends up, unfortunately, trumping the environmental voice in the room who's trying to get other things done. And another couple slides. This is a report we just did on, it's similar to the Bill McKibben Do the Math. There's a lot of discussion now about the carbon we know about and what we can't burn. So there's roughly 5 times as much carbon on the books of companies on the stock markets than can be burned and put in the atmosphere if we're going to keep ourselves below thresholds of irreversible climate change as defined by the computer models. And this is a graphic of where that is on Earth, and some of the big ones that we have potentially some power to deal with are Arctic oil, U.S. coal exports, fracking in the U.S., and the tar sands, and they add up, and the Gulf of Mexico. They add up to a very large percentage. So you can think of each of these as a straw that cumulatively breaks the camel's back, but we're now looking at which ones of these we can have leverage over. And I'll just leave you with another, we can always kick back. So this is over. The Koch brothers had a meeting in California to strategize their hopeful takeover of the government last year, which they failed at, thankfully. And we did a little. We just flew this over their meeting just to let them know we were in love with them. And then this is just to leave you with the irony that in these most beautiful places and the species and the ecosystems that are being disrupted, there's still a lot of beauty. So that's all I have to show you. Thanks. Not too depressing.